committed himself to praying for each of them every single day until God drew them to salvation. He prayed, not for days or weeks, but for decades over this list of names. And slowly, one by one, those names began to be crossed off the list as they came to Christ. By the time he died in 1899, 96 of the 100 names on his list had given their lives to Christ. But the story doesn't end there. At his funeral, he had one request, and that is that the gospel would be shared. And in that room sat thousands of people, including many of the people who were on that list, and the 4 names who had yet to come to Christ. Through the testimony that was given at his funeral, those final 4 people walked forward and gave their lives to Christ. This man, with a 5th grade education, the shoe salesman that no one thought much of, was Dwight L. Moody, one of the most influential evangelists in history. It wasn't his eloquence or his high education or his grammar that moved heaven and earth. It was his prayers. Now, for many in this room, the idea that prayer is powerful and effective is not something that we would argue. We know that truth. We believe that prayer works. We know in our hearts that prayer is good, but if we're being honest, and I think it's good that we're being honest in church, for many of us, we can also admit that while we believe in the power of prayer, we do not need another sermon about how powerful prayer is. Though we believe that, prayer is not something that we regularly take part in. At least not to the level that we ascribe power to it. We have this tool available to us, but for many of us, we keep it hidden. It's the great contradiction in the church. This thing is available to us. This thing that we truly believe in our hearts can move mountains, can bring supernatural power into this world and change things. And yet at the same time, most of us keep that weapon, keep that tool tucked away somewhere safe, and we only break it out in case of emergency or before meals to try to bless the food. You know, as I shared the story of D.L. Moody, I wouldn't be surprised if a few of you felt very motivated to start making a list. Maybe you even started writing it down in your notes or in your phone, your names of people that you want to see come to Christ. And while I love that, I think that's great, and hopefully by the end of today, you'll have a few names on a list. What would happen if you make that list and you begin to pray for a few days, or a few weeks, or maybe even a few months, and nothing happens? Would you continue? Would you keep on praying? Would you continue to press on, trusting that God is faithful to answer? Or, like me, many times, would that list eventually get buried in your wallet, or your purse, or in some drawer in your house amongst all the loose pins and unpaid bills that you're afraid to look at? And you'd forget all about it. I think if we're honest with ourselves, we know the answer. We know if the answers didn't come fast enough, if we didn't start seeing immediate results, we'd probably just resort to the way we've always done things. That's why I don't think the greatest barrier for people is that we don't think prayer works. I think the greatest barrier of prayer is that we're afraid of silence. We're afraid that God won't move fast enough. What if God doesn't answer as quickly as I want? What if I pray and pray and pray and nothing happens? What will that do to my faith? It would be easier if I just keep on doing things the way I've always done them than putting myself out there with God. Today we're going to look at a couple parables of Jesus that teach us how to pray like Jesus. Because the way Jesus prayed was different from the way we pray. Not in form or function, but in authority and in relationship. The first story we're going to look, the first parable we're going to look at comes immediately after Jesus teaches his disciples the Lord's Prayer, which we looked at last week. And if you weren't here or you missed the sermon last week, I really encourage you, go back and listen to Julius's sermon on forgiveness. I get accused a lot of getting in people's business. Julius, you got in my business last Sunday. We didn't have a staff meeting this week and didn't talk about getting all up in my stuff. If you didn't hear it, go back and listen to what the Lord's Prayer really says. We're not going to go back through it today. I hope you know it. If you don't, you can find it in Luke chapter 11. But after the Lord's Prayer, Jesus teaches a parable. But it's important to remember why Jesus even taught the Lord's Prayer. Jesus didn't bring it up. His disciples did. His disciples, they came to him and they said, Jesus, teach us how to pray. Which is a really weird thing for a bunch of Jewish guys to ask somebody. You see, because they had spent their lives praying. The Jewish custom was to pray morning, noon, and night. Every single day.
Absolutely.
Without fail. If the guys were out on their fishing boat and noon hit, they got on their knees and they prayed. If it was late at night, they got on their knees and they prayed. The act of praying was something they were very familiar with. And Jesus had that same rhythm, morning, afternoon, and night. He prayed. But there was something different about the way Jesus prayed. There was something different about the relationship that he seemed to have with God that made them say, we've been praying, but we don't get to pray like you pray. We want to be able to talk to God the way you talk to God. And so Jesus teaches them the Lord's Prayer, and then he shares this parable in Luke chapter 11, starting in verse 5. Then Jesus said to them, suppose you have a friend, and you go to him at midnight and say, friend, lend me 3 loaves of bread. A friend of mine on a journey has come to me, and I have no food to offer him. And suppose the one inside answers, don't bother me. The door is already locked, and my children and I are in bed. I can't get up and give you anything. I tell you, even though he will not get up and give you the bread because of friendship, yet because of your shameless audacity, if you want to underline that word, he will surely get up and give you as much as you need. So I say to you, ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, the one who seeks finds, and the one who knocks, the door will be opened. This first parable, Jesus tells the story of a guy going to his friend's house looking for bread because he has been caught unprepared for his guests. Somebody showed up to his house and he wasn't ready. And we read this parable and we think, oh, well, this rude friend of his, well, why would he say no? Why wouldn't he give his friend bread? But let's make this a modern day parable for a moment. Maybe you've had this happen. Have you ever gone to bed at night, gotten your kids down, you and your wife have laid down, the dog's asleep, everything is quiet, and then about 3 in the morning, somebody comes and starts banging on your door? There is a level of panic that cannot be matched in that moment. You fly out of bed, you grab the baseball bat, your wife is screaming, what is going on? Figure out what's happening. Your kids are terrified in their rooms, and your dog is losing its mind. It's a whole lot of chaos. Now imagine you go to your door and you look at the people, bat ready. I'm going to take this person out. Whatever's going on, it's on. And you see your neighbor, your friend, and they're banging on the door. So you yell out, "What?" as you're in your boxers. And you're thinking they're being attacked. There's an emergency in their house. Something terrible must be happening. You're giving them the benefit of the doubt, right? This must be an emergency for somebody to come to my house at this time and to cause all this chaos inside. Like, the next hour and a half of my life, it's just going to be me taking deep breaths trying to get my heart rate back down. And they don't say I have an intruder in my home. They don't say there's been a death in the family. Instead, they say, hey, I was baking some cookies and I ran out of butter. I had a hankering for some chocolate chips. Can I borrow a stick of butter? Now tell me, would your friendship to that person inspire you to lovingly offer them a stick of butter? Most likely not. But as you calm down, would you not just give them the stick of butter because of just the ridiculous, shameless audacity that they would even do this thing? Like, just go away. Here, take it. This is what this parable is saying. But here's the thing. This is not a parable saying that God is like that neighbor. You know, we can get all sorts of messed up theology if we say that this is an allegory and that God is like that neighbor inside his house that doesn't want to open the door. This is not a comparison. God is not being compared to him. He's being contrasted from him. This is a how much more parable. How much more would God do this thing if in this situation you would do it? Like, if the worst came to worst, if that situation happened in your home, you would give the stick of butter. You would not be happy about it. You might have a conversation the next day with your neighbor. You might go over to their house and have a little bit of a, come to Jesus moment. But you would do the nice thing for them just out of the audacity of the request. How much more, if we come to God in prayer, would our loving Father, who never grows tired, never sleeps, never rests, never shuts the lights off, never has quiet time, how much more, as his children coming to him, would he not be willing to give us what we ask for? That's what this parable is saying. It's saying when we come to God, we don't come as an annoying neighbor. We come as a child. And we don't come to God as worn out, to a God who's worn out and exhausted and annoyed. We come to a God who willingly opens the door to us and says, come in, take whatever you need. I think sometimes we're afraid to pray because of the audacity of the requests that we make. I mean, the audacity of D.L. Moody to write 100 names down and expect God to bring all those people to faith, right? I mean, it's crazy enough that I wrote down 5 and thought God should do that or might do that. For D.L. Moody to go so far to put 100 names on his list. The audacity for us to pray for things like justice in the world. The audacity for us to pray for forgiveness of sins. Even more, the audacity that we would pray for small things. For instance, I have seen the power of prayer through these massive answers. I have seen healings. I have prayed a prayer where I said, God, if you don't do this, I don't know what I'm going to do. If you don't heal this person, I don't know how I'm going to process this. And God did it. And it's like, okay, how could I ever doubt him? But I've also prayed some pretty audacious prayers. Some shameless prayers. Like one day I was running late for school with my kids. And I got in the car, and I wasted God's time. And said, God, let me hit the green lights on the way to school. I need you now more than ever. Now, I have prayed for somebody's life to be saved, and I remember thinking, I need this, God. I don't know what I'm going to do if you don't come through. Let me hit these green lights right. Because I know there is a pattern, and I never reach it. I never get it, but I know it exists, that I could fly through all of these, and we could still make it. You know what the crazy thing is God answered that prayer. I have 24 hours in a day. I spend maybe 30 minutes of that. We're going to round up here in prayer each day. And I wasted 3 or 4 of those minutes praying to God that I would hit a green light instead of praying for justice or mercy or forgiveness or salvation for people or healing for people. I wasted his time with a prayer to hit green lights, and he still answered it. He'll answer our shamelessly audastic prayers because he loves us and he cares for us. Now, the reality is, we have all prayed some prayers that God hasn't answered. I have also prayed those same prayers, God, get me to school on time. And I've hit a few red lights on my way. Why wouldn't he answer? See, prayer is an act of trust. It's you're praying to a Father who loves you, and it's putting something in his hands and saying, God, I trust that your ways are bigger than mine, that you know better than I know, and whatever you end up doing, I'm going to have to trust it because I believe you are good. And you have a choice to make every time you pray. And this is going to sound ridiculous, but I could have gotten behind the wheel of the car that day, and instead of praying, I could have just taken matters into my own hands. I could have yelled at my kids to hurry it up and ruin their morning. I could have gotten behind the wheel of the car, thrown it in reverse, sped out of my driveway, cut people off, and sped all the way to school, putting my life and the lives of my kids and the lives of everybody else on the road in danger, instead of trusting in God. I think a lot of times that's how we treat prayer. We'd rather do that than trust that he might have a way for us to get there. Or that it will be okay if we're late. And that he'll work it out because he loves us. Now, there's another parable that Jesus shares on prayer, and this one comes in Luke 18. And this is one of the only parables where Luke just spoils the ending. Okay? Right at the beginning, he tells you the exact reason Jesus told this parable. Usually, we have to say, if you've gotten used to these parables, you realize like there's some explaining to do after every parable. Not this one. Luke's like, hey, this is a freebie. Jesus taught us how to pray and not give up. And this is the parable. He said in verse 2, in a certain town there was a judge who neither feared God nor cared what people thought. And there was a widow in that town who kept coming to him with a plea, grant me justice against my adversary. For some time he refused, but finally he said to himself, even though I don't fear God or care what people think, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will see that she gets justice, so that she won't eventually come and attack me. I like this lady already. And the Lord said, this is Jesus, listen to what the unjust judge says. And will not God bring about justice for his chosen ones, who cry out to him day and night? Will he keep putting them off? I tell you, he will see that they get justice and quickly. However, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith or faithfulness these two parables, they share a similar heartbeat. They're both about prayer. They're both how much more parables. Again, this one's more obvious, but obviously the judge does not represent God in this parable. God is definitely not someone who doesn't care about people. And God definitely likes God because it's him. So in this parable, we're not supposed to say God is the judge, and the way that we get our prayers answered is by pestering him. That's not the point. The point is that we need to be persistent in our prayers. That we need to pray and not give up, as Luke says. This goes back to your list of 100. Would you pray for those people day in and day out? Because they matter that much. And because you believe that God is going to do it. In this parable, again, it's not a comparison. We have this widow. She does not represent you and I. And the judge does not represent God. Instead, it's kind of the worst case scenario. If you look at this widow, she has a lot going against her. First off, she is a woman. And in this society, in first century Palestine, women did not have rights. Women could not vote, they could not own property, they could not bring a case before a judge without a male doing it for them. It was not a great time for women. And it was not something that Jesus liked either, so we're not going to get too deep into it. But just because Jesus was there doesn't mean he approved. And that's why he welcomed women into his circle constantly. But this woman, she had that going against her. Not only that, she was also a widow. That means she didn't have a husband. And widows were put in a really vulnerable position. Because they couldn't own property, and typically, women in this age were married off to much older men. So there were a lot of widows. Because the husbands would die, and the young girls would be left to figure it out. And oftentimes, nobody else wanted to marry them because they were widows. And they had kind of worn out their usefulness. If the widow did not have family, either on his side, the husband's side, or her side, to take her back in and provide for her, she would end up on the streets with nothing. Usually, widows in that situation would find themselves selling themselves into slavery or something worse. That's what would happen to unmarried women. But that's not the only thing she had going against her. She wasn't just a woman, and she wasn't just a widow. She was also poor. Because she had nothing, she didn't inherit anything from her husband, and she didn't have any family to take care of her. She was alone, and she had nothing. And the way the legal system just happened to work is that if you wanted your case heard, the one way you could get past the woman-widow thing was money. If you lined the judge's pockets, you might just get an audience. You see, the judge would move around the city. He would do a circuit, and he'd set up a tent each day. There were no police that brought charges against people. There were no lawyers that would defend people. You brought your own case. If you had an issue with your neighbor because they knocked on your door in the middle of the night, you'd have to drag them to the tent and say, "This idiot woke me up." And the judge, who represented God and his law, the Torah, would stand there and decide who is just in this situation. Who is right? Who deserves justice? Now imagine you're a poor woman who's widowed, and you come to an unjust judge. His job is to defend the law written in the Torah, and he doesn't even care about God. In fact, it says he doesn't care about God or man. If you remember when Jesus summarized the law, he said we should love God and love others. This guy is as far from God as he could possibly be, as far from righteous as he could be. He's not even getting half of it. But because she just keeps showing up, it's like every day he'd set up his tent at a different place in town, and he'd think, okay, this is like a mile from her house. She's not going to be here today. And then he'd show up to work, and there she is outside the tent. Are you ready to hear my case now? Because I want justice. day after day after day, she showed up. And eventually, not because he loved God, not because he believed in justice, not because he cared about her, but just because she was driving him nuts. The word there where it says she might attack me, it better translated, it means give me a black eye. This woman is so persistent, I'm afraid she might just punch me in the face. So I might as well just give her what she wants. So he gives her justice. Again, this is a how much more parable. If that judge could be moved to do the right thing by someone who has zero rights, how much more would our Father, who stands before us, who loves us and cares for us, give his children, who don't come as disenfranchised, poor people with nothing to offer, but instead, the scripture says we come as his chosen ones. His children coming before him, bringing our requests. How much more will he not show us justice? How much more would he not desire to answer our prayers? What these two parables teach together is that because of God's character and because of our identity as his children, we can pray bold, shameless, unceasing prayers to God. And we can trust that he is faithful to answer. Now, one of the hardest things to wrestle with is when the answers don't come fast enough, or the answers aren't what we want. What if we pray for something and God says no? We all have an example. We all have something in our lives, someone we prayed for, prayed so hard for, and we didn't get what we wanted. Does that mean that God isn't good? Does that mean that God doesn't love us or suddenly didn't care? Why would he answer my green light prayers but not answer this? Part of prayer is wrestling with trust. And it's believing that God is doing something bigger and deeper inside of us, even when the answers aren't what we're looking for. That he's forming us into something different. And that maybe prayer isn't just about the asking. You see, in the first parable, Jesus goes on to share something. But there's a story I want to share about this woman named Monica. Monica was a single mom with one child. She was a faithful follower of Jesus. And every night she prayed over her child and sang hymns over him. But like many parents have experienced, her son did not grow up and share her faith. In fact, he kind of went the other way. He was no